the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Mr. Michael Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to make a statement on our preparations to leave the European Union on the 31st of October and the steps that we're taking to get ready. It's the strong desire of this government to leave the EU with a deal, and our proposals to replace the backstop were published last week. I commend the Prime Minister and the Exit Secretary for their continued efforts to ensure that we can leave the EU with a withdrawal agreement in place. We've put forward a fair and reasonable compromise for all sides that respects the historic referendum result, and we hope that the EU will engage with us seriously. And in setting out these proposals, we've moved. It is now time for the EU to move too. If it does, then there is still every chance that we can leave with a new deal. However, if the EU does not move, this government is prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st. We must get Brexit done so that the country can move on and focus on improving the NHS, cutting crime, helping families with the cost of living, and further improving school standards. Now, in preparing for every eventuality, we are today publishing our No Deal Readiness Report. This document is a comprehensive summary of the UK's preparedness for leaving the EU without a deal. It sets out the preparation that the government has made, how these have been intensified under the determined leadership of my right honourable friend the Prime Minister, and also it outlines the steps that third-party organisations need to take to get ready. Mr. Speaker, the actions in this report reflect our top priority, ensuring that we maintain the smooth and efficient flow of goods and people from the UK into the EU and vice versa. The actions are also aimed at ensuring that we continue to support citizens, upholding their rights and helping them to prepare for the changes ahead. My right honourable friend the Chancellor, in order to prepare for Brexit, has doubled funding from £4 billion to £8 billion, and we've also published a significant volume of material relating to no-deal planning, including 750 pieces of guidance setting out the steps that businesses, traders and citizens should take in order to prepare. We've also published 31 country guides for all EU EFTA states, setting out what UK nationals living there need to do in order to get ready for Brexit. And this morning, my right honourable friend, the Trade Secretary, has published the temporary tariff regime, which will apply from the 1st of November. In all, it liberalises tariffs on 88% of goods entering the UK by value. It maintains a mixture of tariffs and quotas on 12% of goods, such as beef, lamb, pork, poultry and some dairy products, to support farms and producers who've historically been protected through high EU tariffs in the past. I should say that as a result of cutting these tariffs, we should see a 15% reduction in the cost of honey from New Zealand, a 9% cut in the cost of grapes from South America, and of course a 7% reduction in the cost of wine from Argentina. Now, businesses have raised a number of points in response to the publication of the tariff schedule in March. Government listened carefully to these representations and has made 3 specific changes as a result. We're reducing tariffs on HGVs entering the UK, we're adjusting tariffs on bioethanol to retain support for UK producers, and we're also applying tariffs to additional clothing products to ensure that developing countries continue to have preferential access. But it's not enough just for government to get ready. We need businesses and citizens to get ready too. And even with every government project complete and necessary IT systems in place, flow at the border would still be affected if hauliers don't have the right paperwork. If companies don't prepare, they'll face challenges in trading their goods and services with the EU. And while the government can, of course, lobby EU member states to improve their offer to UK nationals who are living in their countries, we need individuals to act as well, to register for residency and to make arrangements for continued access to healthcare. And it's for that reason the government's invested £100 million in one of the largest public information campaigns in peacetime. Through both, I'm glad you've noticed, through both mass market and targeted advertising, we're alerting business and citizens to the actions that they need to take to get ready. And we're also providing a further £108 million to support businesses in accessing the information and advice they need. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is overseeing a series of events with businesses around the country, designed to provide information on all the steps they need to take to get ready, including actions which will support the flow of trade through the short straits. My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has also today established a Trader Readiness Support Unit for suppliers of medical products, and this week HMRC is writing to 180,000 businesses, setting out the full range of steps that they need to take in order to import and export with the EU after we leave. And of course, in advance of the 31st, we'll continue to use every means at our disposal to communicate to business the need to get ready. And I want to pay particular tribute to the automotive, retail and transport sectors, including authorities at the Port of Dover and Calais, as well as Eurotunnel, for the extent of their Brexit preparations. On a recent visit to the West Midlands, the heartland of our automotive industry, I was impressed by the steps that manufacturers are taking to prepare. And retail businesses have also made significant strides. Morrison's, for example, now reports it is prepared for all eventualities in the UK, while the Co-op says it's prepared for the worst case. Of course, risks remain, and challenges for some businesses cannot be entirely mitigated, even with every possible preparation in place. But the UK economy is in a much better position to meet those risks and challenges thanks to the efforts of these sectors and companies and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor. Now, it is also the case, Mr. Speaker, that the impact of no deal on both the UK and the EU will depend on decisions taken by the EU and its member states, on citizens' rights, internal security, data protection, and of course the vital position of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom. We have taken decisions which will benefit UK nationals as well as EU citizens. I hope the EU will match the generosity and flexibility that we have shown. Through the EU settlement scheme, we've ensured that every EU citizen resident here by the 31st of October can acquire a formal UK immigration status, protecting their right to live and work in the UK. To date, 1.7 million citizens have applied and 1.5 million have been granted the status. Those who have not yet applied have until the end of December 2020 to do so. So far, very few EU member states have made as generous an offer to UK nationals as the UK has made to EU citizens. We don't believe that citizens' rights should be used as a bargaining chip in any scenario. EU citizens in the UK are our friends and family. We want them to stay. We now hope that the EU extends the same hand of friendship towards UK nationals as we have to EU nationals. At the same time, keeping our fellow citizens safe should be a priority. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has written to Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans to ensure effective arrangements are in place on the exchange of passenger name record data, disconnection from SIS2 and working arrangements with Europol, as well as the transfer of law enforcement data. We hope the EU will respond positively in the interest of the shared security of us all. And we've also unilaterally ensured that personal data can continue to flow freely and legally from the UK to the EU and the EEA. A swift adequacy decision from the EU would reciprocate this arrangement, providing legal certainty to EU entities and companies. And of course, with respect to Northern Ireland, in order to avoid a hard border, we have committed not to introduce any checks at the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. The limited number of checks which do need to take place due to international obligations will all be carried out well away from the border and will only affect a very small number of businesses. Now, the Irish government and the EU have not yet set out how they will manage the Irish border if we leave without a deal. We urge them now to match our commitment. Mr. Speaker, let me finally turn to the opportunities from Brexit as laid out in this report. For the first time in 50 years, the UK will have an independent trade policy. We'll be able to take our seat at the WTO. We will be able to introduce a points-based immigration system, which prioritises the skills that we need as a country. We will have autonomy over the rules governing our world-leading services sector, and we will continue our leading role in setting global standards for financial services. We can be a beacon for the world in setting progressive policies on farming, fishing and the wider environment. And outside the jurisdiction of the ECJ, we will set our own rules, putting in place smarter, more responsive regulation. Of course, no deal will bring challenges. I have been open about that today, as I have been in the past. It's not my preferred outcome, nor the government's. We want a good deal. But whatever challenges no deal may create in the short term, and they are significant, these can and will be overcome. Far worse than the disruption of no deal would be the damage to democracy caused by dishonouring the referendum result. 17.4 million people voted to leave, many of them turning up to vote for the first time in their lives. They voted to ensure the laws by which we are governed are set by the politicians in this place whom they elect. They voted for a fairer migration system which attracts the brightest and the best. They voted to end vast financial contributions to the EU budget and instead invest in the people's priorities, such as the NHS and our brave police service. That is what the British people voted for, and that is what this government will deliver, and I commend this statement to the House.
The Prime Minister should be here. Talks with the EU are collapsing as we speak. The proposals the government put forward last week were never going to work. And instead of reacting to challenge by adapting the proposals, the government is intent on collapsing the talks and engaging in a reckless blame game. And it will be working people who pay the price. The Prime Minister should be here to account for his actions. And, Mr. Speaker, it's no good pretending that the proposals put forward would work. That simply isn't going to wash. You cannot take the UK and Northern Ireland out of the customs union and avoid customs checks. And you can't have customs checks without infrastructure in Northern Ireland. The government knows that, which is why it refuses to answer the very simple question, where will the checks take place? You can't be serious about the EU's concerns about protecting the integrity of the single market by simply saying, we'll put that question off until later. And you can't be serious about upholding the Good Friday Agreement while proposing what amounts to a veto to one party in Northern Ireland over the all-Ireland regulatory zone. Consent of all communities in Northern Ireland is at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, and the government has ridden roughshod over that principle. That is why these proposals were never going to work. But instead of responding to legitimate questions by the EU27 or in this House, by actually answering questions, the government appears to be pulling the rug, descending into a reckless blame game instead of putting the country first. Sources close to number 10 say a deal is overwhelmingly unlikely. Sources close to number 10 say it's essentially impossible. Sources close to number 10 start blaming other people. It's Parliament's fault. It's the opposition's fault. It's the Benn Act. It's Germany. It's Ireland. Absolutely defining the character of this Prime Minister, a man who never takes responsibility for his own actions. The stark reality is the government put forward proposals that were designed to fail, and it still won't take responsibility for its own actions. Last night, there were even reports that the government was threatening to withdraw security cooperation with the EU. That's an astonishing statement. If true, it's beneath contempt. Will the Minister take this opportunity to denounce those comments and confirm that that is not the government's position? And will he echo what the Northern Ireland Secretary said this morning when he said withdrawing security cooperation with Ireland is unacceptable and it's not in the interests of Northern Ireland or the Union? Now, I know from the statement last week that instead of answering serious questions, the Minister prefers to revert to pre-prepared attacks and gags. But today is not the day for those tricks again. So can he be straight with the House today? Is it the government's official position to end the negotiations with the EU and to seek to leave on the 31st of October without a deal? If not, will the government either put forward a different basis for negotiations with the EU or be clear that they will seek an extension as required under the Benn Act on October the 19th? The House and this country deserve straight answers. And I appreciate that the Minister speaks as if he's giving a statement or a reassuring bedtime story about preparations for no deal. But let me remind the House that in the same tone last week at that dispatch box, he said, quote, the automotive sector confirmed it was ready. The retail sector has confirmed it is ready. As he knows why we were in here debating this, that drew a furious response. Furious response within hours. The British Retail Consortium had issued a rebuttal saying it's impossible to completely mitigate the significant disruption which will be caused by no deal. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders Limited did likewise within hours. Quotes, in response to what the Minister said, a no-deal Brexit would have an immediate and devastating impact on the industry, undermining competitiveness and causing irreversible and severe damage. Hours after the Minister has said they're ready. What the Minister tells this House in his reassuring tones and what businesses said are two different things, and the Minister knows it. This is no longer a time of games. The reality is that a no deal would be a disaster for the economy and for businesses. That's underlined by today's HMRC figures, which estimate additional costs of £15 billion per year to comply for businesses to comply with customs arrangements. And the IFS, which today warns that no deal would see borrowing rise to £100 billion debt rise to 90% of national income, and growth that will flatline. That's why it's so essential this House passed the Benn Act. It was intended as an insurance policy. And we passed it because we feared that this government was more focused on delivering no deal than doing the hard work needed to find a deal. It's clearer now than ever the Act will be needed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Shadow Brexit Secretary for his questions. He first of all asked where the Prime Minister was. The Prime Minister is talking to our EU partners, attempting to secure a good deal. And he's doing so with the full-hearted support of everyone on this side of the House. And the question that many will be asking outside this House is why does the Honourable Gentleman say that he's so anxious for a deal when he had 3 opportunities to vote for one and he declined to do so every time? And if the Honourable Gentleman wants to be taken seriously as an advocate for compromise and a deal, why was it in cross-party talks in which we both took part that he attempted to erect an obstacle at every turn to consensus across this House? That's the conclusion that people will draw. There's another conclusion that people will draw. This document was made public 3 hours before the Right Honourable Gentleman started asking questions. But he had, having had time to absorb all 156 pages, not a single question about no deal preparation, not a single point to make about how any sector could be better prepared, not a single suggestion, query or contribution to make about how we can ensure that British business is in a robust position. Just a series of questions which we've come to expect from the Right Honourable Gentleman about politics rather than policy, about positioning rather than practicalities. He asked about customs checks in Northern Ireland. He knows, and it's been made clear, those customs checks can take place away from the border at the manufacturer or other distribution site. He also asked how our proposals were serious about maintaining the integrity of the single market. They allow the EU to maintain the integrity of the single market, but is he serious about maintaining the integrity of the United Kingdom? Because he and his party are more than willing to see a customs border erected in the Irish Sea. We would be the only sovereign nation in the world with such a customs border, but he is more than prepared to dance to the EU's tune rather than standing up for the UK. And that is, of course, the spirit in which the Benn Act was passed. It is the case that the Benn Act signals to the EU that there are people in this Parliament who do not want to conclude a deal, who do not want to leave by October the 31st, who want to delay. And indeed, the Right Honourable Gentleman is one of those, because he's had every opportunity to engage meaningfully with government, not just on the deal, but on no-deal preparations as well. When I last spoke to this House, on the 25th of last month, and he referred to my statement then, I invited any MP in this House to come to the Cabinet Office and DEXU to discuss a deal and our no-deal preparations. Only one opposition MP, the member for Leicester West, accepted that invitation. That is and indeed the Right Honourable Lady, the member for North Down, 2 opposition MPs. That is a measure of the seriousness with which the Labour Party, the SNP and all these opposition parties take our Brexit negotiations. An open offer, an invitation to come and talk, rejected hands down. And is there any surprise? Because the Right Honourable Gentleman in 2017 said of the referendum, we had a decision and we respect that decision. He also said the Labour Party cannot spend all of its time trying to rub out yesterday and not accept a result which it is honour-bound to respect. And as I mentioned earlier, after voting against the deal 3 times, he rejected the opportunity to come to a consensus between the front benches in order to get a deal through. We in this government have compromised. We in this government are showing flexibility. We in this government seek to leave without a deal. But faced with the delaying, disruptive and denying tactics of the opposition, we say on behalf of the 17.4 million, enough, 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 we need to leave.
Sir John Redwood.
When Mrs Merkel says that either the UK or Northern Ireland have to stay in the customs union, is she speaking for the EU following consultation with the other 25, or is she just making it up and assuming they will go with her totally unrealistic and inflexible view?
I thank my right honourable friend for that question. I don't know what the contents of the telephone call between the Prime Minister and the Bundeskanzlerin were earlier today, but we remain committed to working with the German and other EU governments to find a deal. I'm sure we can find a way through.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It saddens me that in the middle of this political crisis, what we have is a pathetic masquerade from this government, pretending that it is competently arranging our departure from the European Union, when in fact everyone knows that there is no agreement as to how that departure will take place, and without an agreement it is simply not possible to plan in a proper way how it would take place. And the responsibility for that is entirely of this government's own making, a mixture of its bellicose intransigence in its negotiations with our European partners and its arrogant contempt in trying to establish a political majority in this chamber and using the Brexit vote for its own narrow political ends. And now it's in a situation where the only thing it can do, the only thing it can possibly do, is contemplate crashing out of the EU without a deal. Well, I have to remind the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster that that approach would be illegal, because we have passed a law to say that we will not leave the European Union with no deal. And therefore, first of all, I want to ask him, why is he preparing this document, which is called Preparedness for No Deal? Perhaps it should be called Preparedness for Breaking the Law, since that's essentially the course that he's now engaged in. Why is he preparing this rather than trying to properly come back to this House with proposals which we can debate as to what negotiations they're having with the European Union? Because to my eyes and to those of many colleagues, it looks as if this government isn't in the least bit serious about getting a deal at all, that in fact it's engaging in gesture politics, deliberately setting conditions that it knows cannot be met in order to come back here and try and blame everybody but itself for the consequences that result. And I have two specific questions in terms of the statement. The leader of the spokesman for the opposition referred to the IFS report. This is a damning report that has come out this morning from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. This tears away all credibility for there being an economic case for Brexit. And the IFS is saying that the difference between asking for an extension and considering this matter further or crashing out with a no deal in 3 weeks' time is 4% of GDP, 4% over the next 3 years. I would invite the Secretary of State to tell us, does this now mean that as we complete the first decade of Tory austerity, he and his government are preparing for a second decade, because that is surely the consequence of the course we lead on. And finally, Mr. Speaker, can I ask about the status of EU nationals? Because he makes much of this, saying that everything is rosy in the garden. The truth is that the 1.5 million people that he refers to have got some status. Most of them have got what is called pre-settled status. It is not at all sure that they are going to get settled status. And if he genuinely believes, and if it is the government's policy, that European nationals living in this country should not suffer any disbenefit to their rights as a result of Brexit, then will he commit now to let each and every one of them have a permanent right to remain in this country?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for Edinburgh East for his questions. On the first question about the IFS report, we respectfully disagree with some, not all, of the IFS's conclusions, because an extension would only generate further uncertainty, and that extension would involve us not only continuing to pay money into the European Union, that uncertainty would mean that the investment decisions that business wants to make would still be put on pause. Business leaders, including many of those who backed Remain, like the founder of Carphone Warehouse, have argued now that we need to leave, deal or no deal, in order to have the certainty on which to plan for the future. That is what business wants overwhelmingly, to leave with a deal, but at least to ensure that we have certainty. He also asks about EU nationals, and he makes a very, very fair point. It is the case that actually a majority of those who have been granted status have been granted settled status. Pre-settled status is for those people who have not been in the country or can't demonstrate that they've been in the country for 5 years. But once they've been here for 5 years, they move automatically and smoothly to settled status. And it is the case that the number of people who have applied for status is increasing every day, and it is also the case that our offer is significantly more generous than that for all save a tiny number of EU member states. Those were the serious questions he asked. I know that the honourable gentleman used to be the proprietor of a comedy club in Scotland, which is why I felt that he was trying his hand at some Dadaist and surrealist comedy when he accused this party of trying to establish a majority for political purposes in the House of Commons. That's Scottish National Party policy, trying to establish a bogus, broken-backed majority with Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister for blatantly political purposes. As for using Brexit for its own ends, it's the Scottish National Party that has been attempting to weaponise this argument in order to push its separatist and sectarian agenda. And as for gesture politics, that is the hallmark and stock and trade of the SNP. I'm afraid the Honourable Gentleman was guilty of a psychological phenomenon known as projection, which is accusing your opponents of the sins of which you yourself are guilty.
Maria Miller.
Friend for his statement, and I'm sure that the 3 million EU citizens who live in our country will very much welcome that their rights to health, to education and to welfare are being fully protected in the event of no Brexit. Does he have any hope of being able to secure similar rights for the people who are living, working and studying, who are British nationals, who are working, living and studying in EU countries, particularly those who may need to secure healthcare benefits?
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very, very good point. And the picture across member states varies. There are some member states, Spain in particular, which have done an enormous amount. And of course, Spain is the country which has the highest number of UK nationals living abroad. I also have to commend the government of Denmark for the approach that it's taken. We're working with EU member states in order to ensure that there is access to reciprocal healthcare. We're making sure, of course, also that UK citizens abroad continue to have access to pension uprating and to the welfare benefits to which they're entitled. And I hope that more EU member states will improve the offer to UK nationals.
Hilary Benn.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster's beguiling manner at the dispatch box, his statement today bears only a passing relationship to reality. Number 10 is briefing that the talks are going nowhere, and he knows that if that remains the case, then the Prime Minister will be under a legal obligation to write to apply for an extension, which, if granted by the European Union, will mean that we will not be leaving the European Union without a deal on the 31st of October. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman wrote in March this year, we didn't vote to leave without a deal. Why is he now advocating on behalf of the government a policy that he himself has admitted there is no mandate for?
I'm grateful as ever for the thoughtful tone in which the Right Honourable Gentleman asks his questions, and also grateful for the opportunity which I hope I will have to appear in front of his committee to discuss in detail some of the provisions within this document. We take a different view on the Act that bears his name. I think that it weakens the UK government's position. He, in all conscience, believes that it strengthens the UK's position. But we disagree on that. It is, of course, possible, for a host of reasons, that we might leave on October the 31st without a deal, and it is prudent for this government, as indeed the Scottish Government and the Welsh Assembly Government, led by Labour, are preparing, because that eventuality is a realisable and potential outcome. But in the meantime, I'm anxious to secure a deal. I argue that we should leave the European Union without a deal, but if it's impossible to leave the European Union without a deal, then, much though I regret it, we have to leave.
Looking at me imploringly, and now to be heard, is the longest-serving member of the Speaker's panel of chairs, Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will recall that some weeks ago you afforded me the opportunity to ask the Prime Minister what provision would be made for pension uprating, for healthcare and for benefits for expat UK citizens. My letter seeking a clarification of the broad brush answer awaits a response. But I have had the opportunity to read the No Deal Readiness Report. There is not one word in it that offers long-term comfort to the thousands of now increasingly frightened and elderly UK citizens living within the rest of the European Union. This is not a matter for reciprocal arrangements. It is within the clear gift of the United Kingdom government to look after our own people. Will my right honourable friend give a clear undertaking that that will be done?
grateful to my honourable friend for raising it. He will be aware, I think, that on page 43 of the document, we point out that with regard to UK state pensions paid to eligible UK state pension recipients living in member states, in the event of leaving without a deal, the UK is now committed to uprate state pensions paid in the EU for a further 3 years beyond the original guarantee until the end of March 2023. We have a commitment, of course, to keep this policy under review.
Yvette Cooper.
It's reported that a Downing Street advisor has threatened that the UK will withdraw security cooperation if Europe does not do what the Prime Minister wants.
Disgraceful.
Does he agree that, given the common threats that we face, extremism, terrorism, trafficking, organised crime, that this is extremely irresponsible and dangerous, that there is no planet on which this is in our national interest, when, regardless whatever the Brexit plans, we need countries to work together? So will he condemn those threats from this Downing Street advisor? Will he agree that any advisor who makes such threats in public or private is not fit to hold any post in number 10 Downing Street? Will he and the Prime Minister take some responsibility for removing anyone who pursues that course and argument from number 10 Downing Street? Because, frankly, when national security is at stake, we desperately need some advisors, some ministers and a Prime Minister who are capable of behaving like grown-ups.
The Right Honourable Lady is right that it is vitally important that we maintain security cooperation with our European allies. It is the case that we cooperate not just with the other EU 27 nations, but also with nations outside the EU on the exchange of information by security and intelligence agencies to keep us safe. And that will continue outside the EU. And we will continue to cooperate with the Garda Síochána and other police forces in order to ensure that our citizens are kept safe and the citizenry in our neighbouring countries are kept safe. But one thing that I would respectfully say to the Honourable Lady, and I know she takes these issues incredibly seriously, is that my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has written to Frans Timmermans, who's the member of the EU Commission responsible for these issues, saying that we wish to continue cooperating in a number of areas. And the EU themselves have said that they don't wish to continue cooperation. So I absolutely respect the Right Honourable Lady's commitment to our cooperation with the EU. It is the case that we want to cooperate with the EU more than they currently want to cooperate with us.
Damien Green.
Right Honourable Friend, for reaffirming the government's preference for leaving with a deal. That today is an important commitment to many of us on this side of the House. But can I draw his attention to page 17 of his report, where he says that on both the M20 and at Manston, the government will deploy resources to establish whether drivers have the necessary border documentation prior to proceeding to their point of departure at the Port of Dover or Eurotunnel. Could I plead, even at the possibly late stage, that some of this checking, which is essential, can be done before the lorries enter the last few miles of their journey to the Port of Dover or Eurotunnel? Because if we spread these checks around the country, they need not cause any pain to the local traffic system.
My Right Honourable friend is absolutely right, and my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, has ensured that across the United Kingdom, at service stations and other points on our motorway system where hauliers are likely to pause or pass, that we're in a position to provide them not just with the information they need to know whether or not they are compliant with EU rules, but also the opportunity to, if they need to, correct the paperwork that they have, or if they're not compliant, to turn back, because we want to do everything possible to ensure that non-compliant vehicles get nowhere near Kent, for reasons both of maintaining flow at the border and also safeguarding the interests of my Right Honourable friend citizens and other Kent residents.
Bradshaw.
The business and local authority organisation representing Devon and Cornwall, the heart of the South West LEP, wrote to him last week, telling him that with the wholly inadequate mitigation measures already in place, that a no-deal Brexit would be as bad for our region, and I quote, as foot and mouth, except it'll go on for a lot longer, won't it? Are they wrong?
Yes, I think they are, but I think it's also important that if we put to one side the rhetoric which organisations often use in order to try to secure attention, if we look in a granular way, well, I think it's... I won't put... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we put aside the rhetoric for one moment, there are granular issues which local resilience fora and local enterprise partnerships address, and I'd be very, very grateful to address those and indeed to meet the right honourable gentleman if there are specific questions that he wants to put and specific easements that he wants to see put in place.
Andrew Mitchell.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his courteous and helpful statement? But may I ask the Chancellor, and indeed former Government Chief Whip, is he proud of the tone and character of quasi-official briefings and language coming out of Number 10? Does he think it is helpful?
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and he was kind enough to say that I was courteous. Can I also thank him for the courtesy and thoughtfulness with which he addresses every issue in this House? And he is right. I think it's important for all of us in public life, whether we're appearing here at the dispatch box or working for government ministers or for opposition figures, to use language which shows our respect for differing points of view, even as we hold robustly to our own.
Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, this is Brexit reality. £8 billion of taxpayers' money. That's the equivalent of 400 brand spanking state-of-the-art schools being spent on something that people did not vote for and were not promised. And we've just heard about the cost of business, £15 billion, and that's before we've sorted out the tariffs. The Leave campaign, which the Right Honourable Gentleman was a proud leader of, they promised we would not leave the European Union until we'd secured a good deal. And we were told it was going to be so easy, it would take somewhere in the matter of a few days. 3.5 years on, the reason why we haven't left the EU is because the simple truth of it is that whichever way you do it, it is going to harm our economy and it's going to cut jobs and the future prosperity of our constituents. The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about the 17 million people who swallowed much of the falsehoods and fake promises that were made by the Right Honourable Gentleman and others, forgetting the 29 million who did not vote for us to leave the European Union. Isn't the only way out of this crisis now to put this matter back to the British people by way of a confirmatory referendum, at last a people's vote?
No.
Greg Hands.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the publication of the 31 country guides for UK nationals in other EU and EEA countries. I'm going to ask him a question I asked our honourable friend, the member for Worcester, when he was working on no-deal preparations. Is it possible to publish the preparations done by those countries all in the same place, so we can actually compare countries like Spain and Denmark, which are doing the right thing for our nationals, with those countries that perhaps aren't?
It's a characteristically original and helpful and constructive idea from my right honourable friend. One of the things that I think that we should do is, as well as the individual country guides, also publish a guide which allows for the comparisons of the kind that he mentions. Absolutely.
Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 4 of the document, he says that the agricultural support will be continued at the current level till the end of this Parliament. Given that he wants an election before Christmas, this is possibly the emptiest promise in the whole document. And it's no wonder that the NFU describe the government's plans as, quote, catastrophic. He knows that hill farmers are going to face 48% tariffs on lamb exports. He has a salary of $140,000 a year. They earn $14,000. How can he stand there and behave as if this is not a serious, critical, existential problem?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for making the points that she has about the hill farmers whom she represents with such energy and passion, and she is right. And I've never shied away from this fact that if we leave without a deal, there will be some sectors of our economy that will face bigger challenges than others. And if we look in particular at the fate of sheep farmers, they, along with the Northern Ireland dairy sector, are perhaps two of the sectors most likely to be most adversely affected. We take very seriously our responsibilities towards those who rear and grow the food upon which we depend, and that's why my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, has a comprehensive support package necessary in order to help anyone who may be adversely affected.
In order to accommodate as many honourable and right honourable members as possible, I'm now looking for short questions without preamble and comparably pithy replies. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
We have been extremely generous to 3 million EU citizens residing in this country at the point of a no deal. Surely our EU partners could be equally as generous in providing assurance for a million odd of our citizens living in Europe. They have been threatened to have to reapply for residence next year, and they don't know where they stand.
My right honourable friend is right, and as I mentioned earlier, some member states have been more generous than others. We respect the political constraints under which some governments operate, but we want to work with them to guarantee the position of UK nationals.
Stephen Timms.
The Minister's recognised that the key to the level of chaos at Dover after a no-deal Brexit is the number of non-compliant trucks arriving without customs documents. In June, HMRC estimated at least 20%, so at least 2,000 a day. What is HMRC's current estimate of the number?
Chancellor.
We're currently revising those estimates. We hope to publish a revision of those estimates. One of the key things is that the HMRC calculation on which companies will be ready depends on translating data that they have on the amount of goods exported by value into the amount of goods exported by volume. And as I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will be aware, that is not an easy calculation to robustly underpin.
Mr. Grayling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on this work? There is no incompatibility between being well prepared for no deal and working hard for a deal.
Yeah.
But does he share my surprise and a little disappointment that the Irish government appears to be preparing to carry out customs checks away from the border in a no-deal scenario, but appear less willing to talk about customs checks away from the border in a deal scenario?
I thank my right honourable friend for the enormous amount of work that he did when he was Secretary of State for Transport in order to prepare us for both leaving without a deal and also the opportunities of life outside Brexit. He worked incredibly hard with tremendous focus, passion and energy, and we are all in this country better off for his service in government, and I want to put that on record and underline my thanks to him. And he's also absolutely right as well that, while of course we respect the sovereignty of the EU and the Irish government's position, it's in the Irish government's interests to avoid there being infrastructure near the border by collaborating and cooperating with us to secure a deal.
This so-called no-deal Brexit readiness report is no such thing. It does not reflect the readiness of businesses in Newcastle for this devastating impact of a no-deal Brexit. It doesn't talk about currency fluctuations, it doesn't talk about how many businesses have got the documentation for import and export, and most importantly, it doesn't talk about how many jobs will be lost. How many jobs will be lost in Newcastle?
Well, one of the things that I would say is that businesses in Newcastle and the North East and more broadly are at various different states of readiness. Some of those companies which are fully ready see opportunities from the moment that we leave in order to be able to grow. One of the things that I hope we can work together on is making sure that all businesses recognise what it is that they need to do. That's why HMRC and others are, for example, automatically authorising EORI numbers and making it easier for people to take advantage of transitional simplified procedures.
Recognise that there will be dismay today amongst the UK oil refining sector at the government's announcement of its no-deal tariff plans, which removes the level playing field for their trade with the EU. So how does this government plan to support these very important strategic assets for the country?
Honourable friend makes a very good point. It's important when we were looking at our tariffs to make sure that we did everything possible to ensure that prices remained low for consumers and for industry, but there are bespoke arrangements that we can put in place to support our refineries which do such an important job.
Lady Herman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Let me say very clearly to the Minister that the Prime Minister and his government will never be forgotten or forgiven for undermining the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has guaranteed peace and stability for all of us for the 21 years since it was signed. That agreement was endorsed in 2 referendums, one in Northern Ireland, one in the Republic of Ireland. Thousands upon thousands and thousands of people voted for in those 2 referendums for the agreement. When is the Prime Minister going to feel honour bound to respect those referendums?
Well, my honourable friend knows that I have enormous respect for her, not just as a parliamentarian, but also because of a distinguished career in public service in Northern Ireland. I don't believe that it's the Prime Minister's intention for a moment to undermine the Belfast Agreement. And I know that she and I have we've had the opportunity to talk both in this chamber and outside about how important it is to support all those who believe in maintaining the gains of peace over the last 21 years. I don't believe it's the Prime Minister's intention to undermine at all. Far from it. We believe that the proposal that we've put forward is consistent with the Belfast Agreement, but I understand that there will be people of good conscience who may disagree.
Mr. Speaker, can I draw the Chancellor of the Duchy back to the opening part of his statement where he talked about the prospects for a deal? Can I just say that if the reports are accurate this morning about the call between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of Germany, they are very worrying, because it cannot be the case that we can only leave the European Union by leaving part of our country behind. And that won't just mean that we won't get a deal by the 31st of October. It will mean that we won't be able to get a deal at all. So if that is the position, can I urge him, with his Cabinet colleagues, to hold fast to our position and urge our European partners to look at the Prime Minister's constructive proposals and negotiate them over the next couple of weeks so we can get a deal, and all those on the opposition benches worried about no deal will, I'm sure, be in the division. They'll be supporting it in due course.
Well, my right honourable friend makes a very, very important point. In the proposal that we put forward, we've said that the people of Northern Ireland will be subject to the EU acquis as it applies to manufacturing goods and agri-foods. That causes some discomfort for some in Northern Ireland, but at the same time, the one thing that we can't accept is the idea that there should be a customs border inside our own country. There's no country on earth that allows a customs border to be erected between its own people. So therefore, if it is the case, and I haven't heard actually that it is, but if it is the case that any politician says that either Northern Ireland must stay in the customs union come what may, they're either saying that we should generate dynamic forces that separate our country, or that the UK can only leave the EU on terms that the EU dictates, and that can't be acceptable.
Single sentence questions, please. Angela Smith.
Speaker, the document makes it clear that environmental standards will be not only maintained but enhanced. A leaked DEFRA paper yesterday, written by civil servants, said that the DIT will push DEFRA to lower UK standards governing animal welfare and pesticide residues. Does that not indicate that this paper is not worth the paper? This document is not worth the paper it's written on.
As we leave the European Union, we're taking steps actually to improve animal welfare standards, not least by taking steps to end the live export of animals to Europe. And it's also the case that we're introducing legislation on everything from puppy farming to banning the use of primates as pets, which means that the UK, as a nation of animal lovers, leads the world in animal welfare.
Steve Lovell.
Thank you, Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Benn Act that was rushed through this House last month actually makes getting a deal harder for the government? And if we are forced to delay, not only will it extend the uncertainty for our businesses that want this matter resolved, it will simply mean we're having the same discussions we are today 3 weeks before the new deadline.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I know there were good people who voted for the Right Honourable Gentleman's Act, thinking that it would help the country. I don't, cast any aspersions on their motivation, but let's look at the consequences. The consequences of it are that it is more difficult to secure a deal. And as a result, I hope that all those who voted for it, and I respect their motivation, reflect on the position we now find ourselves in.
Mr. Speaker, as the 31st of October approaches, when will the government deliver on its promise to put in place a UK version of the current EU steel safeguards?
Short.
Steve Ryan. Page 49. The government's permitted EU airlines to continue to fly to and from the UK until 24th of October 2020. What does the Minister envisage as the situation after that, given he rightly makes the point about business certainty? And what's the situation regarding new routes that may be opened up during that time?
I'm confident that on aviation we will make progress, but I understand the importance of it to my right honourable friend and his constituents.
Mr. Speaker, after 10 years of austerity, the Institute of Fiscal Studies figures show that we're back to square one with no discernible global financial crisis in place to explain the government's incompetent handling of the finances. Would any other government consider a no-deal Brexit with the finances in that state?
Business takes a variety of views on Brexit and indeed on no-deal Brexit, but I have yet to meet a single businessman, woman or organisation that thinks that a no-deal Brexit will be worse than a Jeremy Corbyn government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At a business event I held in my constituency, the feedback from local businesses was that the delay is more damaging, created by members opposite refusing to actually back the deal the government's negotiating than the current state of affairs. Does my right honourable friend agree with that?
Absolutely. We could have been out of the European Union with a deal if members opposite had backed the Prime Minister Theresa May in her efforts.
These references to named individuals are quite improper. The right honourable gentleman no doubt luxuriated in the lather of the Oxford Union at which he excelled, and he excels in this House other than in that respect. He should wash his mouth out and not refer to named ministers by name, but by title, which he's well able to do. Caroline Lucas.
Speaker, the Minister isn't being straight with us. He has the gall to claim that UK environmental standards post-Brexit will be this beacon to the world, yet in reality he's planning to cut those standards. This document claims the carbon price will apply at a similar level to the EU ETS. That's what it claims. But on page 64 it makes it clear that actually the new carbon emission price, will be at about half the rate of the EU one. So if the government is going to cut incentives to tackle the climate crisis, will they at least be honest about it?
This government is one of the first to commit to net zero by 2050, and we're taking all the steps appropriate in order to ensure that we shift towards renewables and reduce emissions.
Would it not be better for my farming constituents today if the government would listen to the concerns of Minette Batters of the NFU about the tariff regime as a result of no deal, rather than allowing its advisers to blame the EU, blame everyone else and create new barriers to preventing a deal, which the tone of last week was so determined to get?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Minette Batters is a powerful and effective advocate for farmers in the UK, and she is right. I know from my previous job, I know from my role as a constituency MP, that the sector of our economy that faces some of the biggest challenges in the event of no deal is agriculture, and within that there are particular sectors that face particularly stringent challenges. I think it's important that the tariff regime that we've published today provides protection for some particularly vulnerable sectors, but there is more that requires to be done. And on his broader point about tone, I do believe that positivity and optimism are critical to ensuring that whatever noises off there may be, that we keep our eyes on the prize, which is a deal with the European Union.
Can I urge the Minister just to pause and reflect on the deliberate dog whistle briefing put out this morning by Number 10 against Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, in the phone call, apparently as reported, between herself and the Prime Minister, which of course has then sparked a series of frankly racist attacks against the Germans from Leave.eu and others. This is an extremely dangerous course for the government to embark on, and I want to hear right now the Minister condemn it and distance himself from it.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising this. The first thing to say is that I wasn't in on that telephone call. The second thing I want to affirm is that the Bundeskanzlerin and the Federal Republic's government are good friends of this country. I had the opportunity to speak at the German Day of National Unity at the German Embassy last week, where I affirmed our commitment to friendship and the respect that we have for the German people, for their achievements since 1945 as a democracy that we can all admire. And I take this opportunity at this dispatch box to entirely dissociate myself from any sort of racist or demeaning language towards Germany. They are our friends, our allies. They're a great country.
I must say to the Chancellor of the Duchy, my sense is that that statement will be very warmly welcomed across the House, but also by a great many people outside of this place. Whatever their view about Brexit, it is important that decorous language is used, and the Right Honourable Gentleman has just been an exponent of it. Stephen Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I agree with my right honourable friend? As someone who voted for a deal 3 times, I'm pleased to hear that's still the government's policy. Many people beyond the 31st of October will already have travel plans in place. So on a specific point, notwithstanding point 4 on page 41 and the answers he gave to my right honourable friends, could he say how many reciprocal healthcare deals have been signed and how many memorandums of understanding are likely to be signed before October the 31st?
We do have reciprocal healthcare agreements with a number of member states, of which Spain is the most prominent, but we're working through each of the member states, and I will make sure that I will write to the Honourable Gentleman, not just with details of the arrangements that we've reached with every country, but also the steps that we continue to take in order to ensure that our citizens' rights are protected there.
On break.
The Government's Business Readiness Fund, which sets aside just £15 million to help businesses, is going to be more than washed away by the cost to business, according to the FT, of £15 billion extra, 1,000 times more the cost to business. Is this just another example of the Prime Minister's attitude towards business?
This Readiness Fund has been well subscribed, including by organisations such as the IOD and the FSB, in order to make sure that businesses are prepared for life outside the EU. One thing I would say is that the Leave campaign made it clear, and people voted for us to leave both the single market and the customs union. Leaving the customs union means, yes, there are new customs procedures with the EU, but it also means there are opportunities to strike new trade deals with other countries and to be a champion for freer trade across the world. Freer trade reduces prices for consumers in this country and also helps the developing world, and I would have thought that supporting the poorest in this country and supporting the poorest globally would have recommended itself to the Liberal Democrats.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my friend, what is the cash value of the support that he plans to make available in the event of no deal for agricultural and manufacturing businesses, specifically in terms of the impact they will receive from new export tariffs in that scenario?
My honourable friend makes a very good point. It's not just tariffs, and they will particularly affect some in the agricultural sector, but other events and other frictions which could have an adverse effect on specific businesses and specific sectors. That's why my right honourable friends, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Business Secretary, have Operation Kingfisher, which is a means of making sure that we can support any company that is fundamentally viable but experiences turbulence for a short period.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, over the years I've become something of a Gove watcher. Can I say to the Honourable Gentleman, isn't it the fact that in his heart of hearts he really now knows that this country is being led to disaster, led by a man that he neither likes nor trusts?
No, I don't take that view. The Honourable Gentleman is an old friend, and therefore I take his comments in good part. But no, I admire the Prime Minister, and I know that what he's trying to do is what this government is trying to do, which is to honour the votes of his constituents so we can leave the EU.
Maria Caulfield.
Mr. Speaker, for the Republic of Ireland, 3 million tonnes of their goods go to and from the EU via the UK land bridge, and without a deal they are liable to customs checks, tariffs and quotas. More than any other country, would the Minister agree that the Republic of Ireland's best interests are served if the UK leaves the EU with a deal?
My honourable friend and I both want to make sure that the Republic of Ireland is in the strongest possible position after we leave the European Union, and the best thing for the UK, for the Republic of Ireland, and for the many, many interests that we share across these islands is to secure a deal.
Hugh Gaffney.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is planning to shift the UK away from the EU rules on the environment, safety standards and workers' rights in order to secure a trade deal with Donald Trump. Did the Prime Minister have any discussions with the TUC or any trade union, or have you yourself, Minister?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that both he and I have been trade union members, both he and I have been involved in industrial action, both he and I know how important it is to uphold workers' rights, and I've had the opportunity to meet not just the TUC but other trades unions. My own view is that workers' protection matters, and that we have actually higher standards of workers' protection than the EU mandates, and that will continue.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, although this document does show the considerable work being done on the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster's watch, nonetheless it does reinforce his stated view that there is no good day for a no-deal Brexit. If the Labour Party agrees with him and me on this, then is it not time, given that they were all elected on a manifesto to respect the referendum result, for them to say we will avoid no deal by supporting the deal, and would that not help the negotiations in turn?
I think it would, and I think to be fair, that the attitude of EU member states and others towards the proposition we put forward would be, I hope, warmer and more flexible if they knew that it had support across the House. Now, the members of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent Central and Stoke-on-Trent North issued a cautious welcome to this deal, as did the member for Aberavon. If that were the view of the opposition front bench, then I think it would be better for the whole country.
Yeah. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just pick up the point about this being a comprehensive summary? There's two sentences referencing border inspection posts, which will impact seriously our food and fish exports. There will be only 9, as I think the Secretary of State understands. That will lead to not hundreds of certificates being issued, but tens or hundreds of thousands. Does he agree we do not have the capacity in local authorities or vets to service that?
He makes a very important point. The key thing is that we will be taking a continuity approach towards the flow of goods into this country. We won't be administering checks to the for the EU when they export to us. It will be the case that the EU will, of course, at the moment, under its acquis, impose checks. But one of the things I should say is that, for example, the French authorities have ensured that the border inspection post for shellfish will be in Boulogne-sur-Mer. That means that fish which is caught in Scotland on Tuesday can be on sale in France on Wednesday without any impairment.
Single sentence questions. Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On page 71, we see reference to transitional arrangements for the financial services which need to be in place by the 31st of October. How many of them are in place?
Almost all. There are still 1 or 2 statutory instruments that need to be passed.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister assured me on Thursday that he would seek to engage with the Deputy Irish Prime Minister, Simon Coveney, over the concerns the Irish Government had over the veto, potentially, of a minority in Northern Ireland over the border arrangements. I was not able to get an update yesterday from the Under-Secretary of State. Can the Chancellor provide us with an update whether the Prime Minister sought those discussions or not?
I know that my honourable friend will write to the honourable member, but more broadly, one of the key things that the Prime Minister and others have said is that we need to secure consent in Northern Ireland for the arrangements in our proposals, but how we secure that consent is a matter for discussion.
Andrew Bowie.
Our right honourable friend will recall 2 weeks ago myself and other honourable members raised our concerns about the no-deal preparations being done by the Scottish Government. Has he had a chance to speak to the Scottish Government about our concerns just yet? And if he has, how much money that has been sent north has made its way to local authorities in Scotland that need to take relevant action?
Well, the Scottish Government have published this afternoon their own no-deal preparations, and I've scanned them in detail, and I can't see, actually, that money has gone to the local authorities most in need. A miserly £50,000 has gone to each local authority in Scotland. That is not enough to ensure that local authorities like Aberdeenshire have the capacity to issue the export health certificates that the fishing industry needs. And I'm deeply worried that the Scottish Government, despite containing many good ministers, is not passing on the money that we are giving to them for Scotland's citizens.
Head 153 is about preventing terrorism, preventing child abuse and preventing criminal gangs. And yet the document says there will be a mutual loss of capability between the EU and the UK in the event of no deal. He's not going to let that happen, is he?
That's why we've written to Frans Timmermans in order to ask him to extend the access to the databases that we're currently allowed to access. And so far, Frans Timmermans has said no.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's very welcome report and detail that he's provided? I have a simple question for him. He knows that I've been campaigning for citizens' rights. In the event of no deal, on exit day, those British citizens that are in the middle of treatment will only receive treatment for a further 12 months. Why can't we just provide healthcare costs to people that suffer from terminal cancer or MND who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in this position?
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and I will take it up with the Health Secretary in order to make sure that the support that we already give can be extended in precisely the cases that he mentions.
Sentence, Mr Wilson. Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The intransigence of the Irish Government and the EU has resulted in the very comprehensive proposals put forward by the Prime Minister and the compromises which had existed, which had required, being rejected. In light of that, would the Minister think again about his policy of not imposing duties on goods coming from the Irish Republic in order to protect producers in Northern Ireland and to put some pressure on the Irish Government to be realistic?
I entirely appreciate the force of the case that he makes, but it is our judgment that we should not impose additional checks or tariffs on goods coming from Ireland into the Northern Ireland.
In congratulating my right honourable friend for his documents and also his crisp and effective chairmanship of the daily XO committees, I notice that he talks about the environmental safeguards in great detail. Does he think, therefore, that the current desecration of the Covington Woods by HS2, despite the moratorium, might be better controlled after Brexit?
As one former member of this House said to a foreign potentate, I admire his courage, his strength and his indefatigability in being able to insert HS2 into every question, and he knows my views on that matter.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. We spoke in the last questions about pallets, and I raise it again today because in the report recently published on page 113, the government indicates there must be compliance with ISPM 15 to export into Europe. But on page 115, they suggest that there may only need to be compliance with it. To help those who are trying to export on pallets that will be accepted, which is it?
Well, it would be prudent to make sure that pallets are compliant, but we point out that individual firms should contact the supplier or the Timber Packaging and Pallet Confederation, TIMCON, if they need more advice.
Kirsten Hare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without access to tens of thousands of seasonal workers, our software industry in Angus and across the UK will suffer. So can my right honourable friend confirm that he recognises the importance of having a mechanism to be in place to ensure a smooth route for businesses to continue to function by having access to labour in a no-deal situation?
Absolutely, and I think it's important that we look at the operation of the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Scheme and, if necessary, expand the numbers available to people in the soft fruit industry, for which my honourable friend is such a powerful advocate.
Order. I remind the House that only last week the Honourable Lady, the member for Canterbury, made a speech that brought hope and will have changed and will change lives. Colleagues, if you didn't hear it, you missed something. Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of recent fake news from the Prime Minister about a shiny new hospital in Canterbury which currently has no A&E or urgent treatment centres, can the Minister please guarantee that with the resulting possible chaos of Operation Brook, my constituents will still be able to get to the William Harvey in Ashford for the urgent care that they desperately need?
I thank the honourable lady for her question and would only underline your own comments, Mr. Speaker, about her amazing speech last week. We've been looking to make sure that we can accelerate the roadworks on Junction 10A in order to ensure that access to the William Harvey for the honourable lady's constituents and others can be uninterrupted, and I hope to be able to brief her and other Kent MPs on some of the other steps that we're taking in the next week.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Speaker, what date this month does the Secretary of State think it will be necessary to reach an agreement with the EU or notify the country, and in particular business, that there's going to be a no-deal?
Well, I hope that we can make sufficient progress this week in order to be able to say at the EU Council that we have secured a deal. If we haven't secured a deal, then we will have to negotiate the legal framework that this House of Commons has put in place.
Alan Brown.
Speaker, does the fuel supply contingency programme that's mentioned on page 61 make special allowance for the predicted closure of 2 refineries which was outlined in the Yellowhammer document? If not, why not? And when the government tell us what 2 refineries they think are at risk?
Well, there are 6 major refineries across the United Kingdom. There have been representations from the energy sector about our tariff regime, but we stand ready, and in particular the Business Secretary stands ready to support all of our refineries and the vital work they do.
Eddie Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the good people of Walsall North voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU, what role does my honourable friend think Walsall Council can play in ensuring they're as prepared as they can be for Brexit on the 31st of October?
They should pay attention and do everything that they're asked by the outstanding Member of Parliament for Walsall North.
There'll come a time when the right honourable gentleman will want the honourable gentleman's vote. Now, I don't know when that will be, but the time will come. gentleman's got a new ambition. Ooh, it's percolating in my head. Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all, Mr. Speaker, indicate that with your permission, at the end of this item I intend to raise a point of order about comments made by the Chancellor early on, which were deeply offensive to me and to many others. But given the damage that's been done to relationships between the United Kingdom and Germany by the deliberate, malicious and almost certainly inaccurate leaking of a private phone call between the two heads of government, the next time he speaks to his very good friend, the Minister for the Cabinet Office, can he ask him how quickly we can be given a statement by the Cabinet Office that confirms that the suspect, that there only are two possible suspects, that the culprit has been identified and removed from number 10 before they can do any more damage?
That's not a matter for me.
Order. Okay, let's start with Marsha Nicole.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It has come to light that the Department for Work and Pensions are issuing ill and disabled people with positive health guidance statements, asking them to describe their disability or health condition. In these statements, disabled people are being asked, and I quote, to avoid words that sound worse than they are, to describe their disability. This includes avoiding words such as chronic, degenerative or even depression. In essence, the DWP are encouraging disabled people to downplay their disability or health condition. Mr Deputy Speaker, can you advise me on how the Secretary of State can come to this House and make a statement on this issue at the earliest convenience, as it cannot be right that a department is expecting disabled people to downplay their disability or health condition?
Can I first of all say, can I thank the honourable member for giving me notice of the point of order? As she well knows, it's not the responsibility of the Chair, but what we can guarantee is the bench has absolutely heard it, the government bench has heard what you've got to say, and I know that the honourable member will be coming back next Monday, and I'm sure that she will ensure that this House is aware and she will pursue it in the rightful way. Just bear with me. Dr Rupert Hope.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, I wondered if you'd had any indication, before we're prorogued again imminently, of whether the Home Secretary intends to come to the dispatch box to make a statement on the revelations overnight that have come out actually via a Freedom of Information request, that the review her department ordered into buffer zones around abortion clinics to stop the harassment of women contained very disturbing flaws. We now know it was ordered in 2017, it reported last year, but ITV, LBC and the Independent newspaper are reporting that evidence was suppressed and that civil servants were instructed that the main aim of the game was to be seen to be doing something, in quotation marks. In light of the letter that the Home Secretary's received today from 30 different groups, from Mumsnet to the British Medical Association and Royal Colleges of Obstetricians and Nursing, in light of the very moving statement my friend from Walthamstow made on the same subject last week, and the daily distress that women are still suffering up and down the country, can we please get her to right this wrong and have a fresh inquiry to clear up the mess of her two predecessors?
Can I first of all, once again, thank the honourable member for giving me notice of her question. What I would say is the matter she raised is not a matter for me as in the Chair today, but I know that the responsibilities in the Home Office have absolutely heard what you've got to say, and I'm sure the Home Office will be taking that on board. And once again, I know through your good offices and colleagues of your good self will ensure that when we return on Monday, that this matter is the way forward for it to be raised again. Peter Granton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I apologise I couldn't give advance notice of my point of order because I had to remain in my seat hoping to catch the Speaker's eye. But in his answer to my honourable friend in the SNP front bench earlier, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster very, very clearly accused the Scottish National Party of being a sectarian organisation. It's the second time he's done it from the dispatch box. Now, I appreciate, Mr Deputy Speaker, that it's not a question of order as to whether the remarks are offensive, although I hope on reflection he'll understand that those comments are not only deeply offensive but highly irresponsible to accusation to throw at any organisation that works so tirelessly to rid Scotland of the cancer that is sectarian bigotry, a cancer which was very prominent in the community in which I and a member of my colleagues grew up. But can you advise me, Mr Deputy Speaker, is it still the case that a minister who says something untrue from the dispatch box must be given a reasonable chance to correct the record? If they refuse to correct the record, then it is not possible for them to remain as a minister in the government.
In fairness, it is up to the front bench whether they wish to, and I don't know whether the Duchess of Lancaster would want to speak or not. That's his choice, but if he does, of course, I would give way. What I would say is, you wouldn't expect me to comment on, I wasn't chairing the debate, and in fairness to Mr Speaker, if it was disorderly, he would have said so. And that's the one thing I want to be clear of, that in fairness to Mr Speaker, he will have done the right thing at that moment in time. Christopher Leslie.
Order, Mr Deputy Speaker. Parliament is expected to prorogue today, but unusually the Privy Council website still doesn't list an order in Council having been approved for prorogation. The matter is listed on the order paper and in the House of Lords on the order paper, and yet, for some reason, there doesn't appear to have actually been an order in Council passed so far, according to the Privy Council website. Now, normally, Mr Deputy Speaker, orders in Council for prorogation are passed several days before it actually occurs. It's 3:26 p.m. I wonder what's going on.
It's not a matter for the Church, not for me to speculate on the Privy Council. And of course, I'm sure in due course, and I'm sure that you will not take your eye off your mobile phone to ensure that that first-hand knowledge will be through to your good self once you see it on there. But it is not a matter for the Church, as much as it's frustrating. And as a member of the Privy Council, I've got to say, I have no further information to add. Rachel Reeves.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Lots of people will be watching Parliament on television today, but of course 30 years ago that wasn't possible. 27 years ago, Betty Boothroyd became the first female Speaker of the House of Baroness. Betty Boothroyd became Speaker of the House of Commons, and today it's her 90th birthday. I wondered what advice the Deputy Speaker could give on how we could all go about wishing her a happy birthday.
One of them is not to sing in the chamber. But what I would say to you is, I have the greatest respect for Baroness Boothroyd. She is one of my idols, of somebody who I look up to, who set an agenda in this House that we can all respect, the first woman Deputy Speaker. And I've got to say, it's a privilege to have known her. It's a privilege to have been in this House when she was in this chair, and everybody who have ever worked with her hold her in the highest esteem and respect. And the one thing I would say, happy 90th, and many more to come, because she's a great lady that I will always respect. And I always remember fighting the by-elections of Nelson and Combe, which my father took over as the MP afterwards. So yes, we do have a great affinity. Right, let us move on to the business. We now come to the 10-minute rule bill. Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about National Health Service bodies establishing nurse staffing levels. Firstly, can I start by declaring an interest as a nurse and as a member of the Royal College of Nursing who are leading the campaign for safe and effective nurse staffing. Nursing, in my view, is one of the most underestimated professions in the country, if not the world, because while everyone loves a nurse, with colloquial terms such as angel or having a vacation, hero, caring or compassionate being used to describe us, the true impact of nurses and nursing to the nation's health has never been truly recognised. We are more than just a doctor's assistant. The clinical impact of an experienced nurse who holds a patient's hand as they die and at the same time is assessing their level of pain or symptom management, or the advanced nurse practitioner who in places like the Royal Marsden's Clinical Assessment Unit can treat a patient with acute ascites and manage them by inserting a drain to deal with their symptoms, or can look for the first signs of sepsis, are truly saving lives. There is increasing evidence that the right number of qualified nurses can improve patient outcomes in terms of mortality, morbidity and quality of care, and that conversely, insufficient nurses can have potentially life-threatening effects for patients. A study reported in the BMJ by Aiken et al. Looked at discharge data from hospitals for over 275,000 surgical patients in 188 hospitals across Europe, and they found that the greater the number of professional nurses was associated with the lower odds of mortality. And likewise, Bridges et al. Only last year in the BMJ also found that the addition of qualified nurses makes a difference to patient outcomes. And it's not just simply the addition of healthcare workers' numbers, it is that qualified and experienced nurse. There is something in the skill and experience of qualified nurses that improves mortality rates, morbidity rates and quality of care. And while record numbers of nurses have joined the NMC nursing register, with 8,000 more nurses and midwives now registered to work in the UK, there remains over 43,000 nursing vacancies in England alone. The RCN staff survey in 2017 reported that this is having an impact on the ground, and nurses are reporting that care is going undone as a result. And that is why, as a nurse and as a member of the RCN, I am bringing this bill forward to establish legally enforceable nursing staffing levels in the NHS in England, as was done in Wales in 2016 and as in Scotland in June of this year, where they passed the Hospital and Care Staffing Act. There are four main aims to this bill. Firstly, to make the government accountable for nursing levels in England. Currently, no one is accountable for nursing numbers in England, and that is why we have such a high vacancy rate. No one is responsible and no one is accountable for nursing numbers, and therefore that's why we have a lack of strategic action to address this. How are we going to increase student nursing numbers via degree apprenticeships, which are working so well in places like the University of Brighton near my constituency, where student nurses earn while they learn in clinical placements? Or how are we to increase the numbers returning to practice, when returning to practice courses are difficult to access and expensive, as nurses often have to pay for them themselves? How are we going to address the issue of early retirement, when nearly a third of our nurses in practice today are likely to retire in the next 10 years? Without someone taking responsibility, none of these issues are addressed. And while individual trusts do their best to mitigate for recruitment and retention challenges, no one is taking responsibility for the sheer scale of the issue across England. This fits neatly into the second and third part of the bill, which is around a fully costed workforce strategy and is around nursing numbers. Currently, there are no legally enforceable nursing numbers for any healthcare sector in England. In 2014, NICE guidelines for adult wards stated that when nurse-patient ratios reached 8 patients to 1 nurse, this should act as a red flag that care was becoming unsafe. Yet in the 2017 RCN staff survey, 71% of nurses reported that on their last shift they cared for more than 8 patients, and 26% reported that they cared for more than 14 patients. We need legally enforceable numbers so nurses and patients can be protected from unsafe care, and that someone is held to account if this doesn't happen. Currently in England, each trust manages their own staffing numbers, and if money is tight, retention and recruitment just doesn't happen. And to be fair to the trust, they have no pool of nurses on which to draw, and what are they supposed to do? And we do need a nursing workforce strategy to meet the needs in the short term, but also to plan for the long-term healthcare needs of the nation. However, this bill is about more than just ring-fencing nursing numbers. It's about skill mix too. Having experienced qualified nurses is the key to improving patient outcomes. As already mentioned, there is a growing body of evidence to show the difference experienced and qualified nurses can make to patient outcomes. And in my experience of 25 years of working as a nurse, nothing can beat that continuity of looking after the same patient over a period of time that only adequate staffing numbers allows for. An experienced nurse can often get to know their patient and can spot those mild changes, such as mild confusion, which could indicate the start of sepsis, that someone isn't taking their medication, that they're slightly dehydrated, or they've got raised sugar levels. Something as simple as constipation can lead to abdominal pain, nausea and vomiting, dehydration, and ultimately hospital admission. Service managers who are driven to replace nurses by healthcare assistants take a penny-wise and pound-foolish approach. As a qualified nurse, can prevent hospital admissions, reduce lengths of stay and reduce readmissions, simply by using their skill and experience. And any extra paid in higher wages is offset by the savings in relation to length of stay and acute adverse events. Finally, the bill wants to legislate to provide training and education for all nurses throughout the length of their career. If we want nurses to take on more advanced roles, from nurse prescribing to chest drain insertion, the government needs to be responsible for ensuring that training happens. This needs to be both in terms of paying for training, but also to allow study leave. We cannot continue with nurses using their annual leave and their days off to undertake training vital to their roles. Other countries have realised the need for change and have made legislative changes to ensure safe staffing levels. And that is why I am supporting the RCN and Dame Donna Kinnair in bringing this bill forward to create a legal framework that clarifies the roles and responsibilities and accountability for the supply, recruitment and retention for nurses in England.
The honourable member will leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have to leave in the bill. As many of the opinions say aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Alberto Costa, Kate Hoey, Stephen Lloyd, Andrea Jenkins, Andrew Lua, Andrew Griffiths, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, Charlie Elphick, Eddie Hughes and myself.
Maria Colford.
Nurse Staffing Levels Bill.
Second reading, what day?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow! Excellent. I don't think there'll be many here, but good luck. With convenience to the House, I'd like to put motions 2 and 3 together, in which case the question is as on the order paper. Sorry,
I beg to move.
Okay. So the motion is that moved. The question is to put the two together. The question is as on the order paper. As many of the opinions say aye. Aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 4 on the exiting of the European Union, and it is now for Minister Rebecca Poe to move. Minister.
Thank you so much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move the motion that the House has considered the Plant Health EU Exit Regulations 2019. These regulations amend earlier EU exit regulations relating to plant health to update the Plant Health EU Exit Regulations 2019 and ensure that recent EU-derived protective measures against the introduction and spread of harmful plant pests continue to remain effective and operable